Club members. I'm Jen.
And I'm Carrie.
And this is Warhammer 40k Book Club, where we read from a crag. This is episode number 70, and our book is The Bookkeeper's Skull by Justin D. Hill. It is the story of a young enforcer sent out to a mysterious town where their grain reports haven't been coming in on time.
And there's murder.
Murder most foul. Don't worry, everything's fine though. We posted several questions on our website, WH40kbookclub.com, and we encourage participation in our conversations via our channel, YouTube, or Encrypted Vox channel. Spoiler warning. If you haven't yet read this book, definitely check out the book and the questions before listening to this episode, as we'll be talking about the book in great detail from start to finish.
Including who the killer is.
Dun dun dun! Dramatic music. With that, let's dive in. First, did you like the book?
I did. I had a good time with this book.
I did not. I had the opposite.
I could tell by your text, and I think you were shocked by my response because you didn't say anything.
I saw that and I was like, cool. I did not like this book. It reminded me of, I really like when people feed like the entire collected works of Jane Austen into those AI bots and then have the AI bots spit out a short story, because they're generally funny, right? Like it's like 70% accurate, but like parts of it just don't work. This reminded me if you like fed a bunch of horror novels into a AI bot with some Warhammer stuff thrown in and then had it spit out a story. It did not work for me.
It wasn't that discombobulated for me.
Good, I'm glad. What part stood out to you?
Oh, man. You know, there were a few things. A lot of really good insights. I thought, too, just things in general. Like Enforcer Howe's assessment of unworthy. Of course, I knew unworthy was not the killer because that's too obvious, and also like some cult maniac. Come on, they're not going to be like killing people in the dark. They're going to be doing other things. There'd be more of a bleeding than anything else, especially with this cult. But I loved, he was surprised that, this guy was obviously former nobility and he had become a serf. He's like, he was different from most of the holy men I had met who care more about their earthly progression than souls like these. I don't think I'd ever seen
Which we've seen a lot, right?
Huh?
Which we've seen a lot
Right.
in stories.
I don't think I had seen a member of the ecclesiarchy ever take up the life of a serf. It was way more natural for them to adopt the role of overseers. It's like, so fitting. That, and at the very end when he's like, I am much too selfish to be a martyr. Like, you know what? I am there with you. I think I am too.
Yes, I liked that. One of the jokes that I make a lot of times about the Chaos Gods is like, especially like with Nurgle, I am way too vain and OCD to worship Nurgle. Same with Slaanesh, way too vain. Also Tzeentch.
Right.
So I did like that when he's like, oh, I am not going to be a martyr. I was like, same. I'm glad to know that the people in the Warhammer 40k universe are having these same conversations that we are.
Yeah, that not everybody wants to die in the glory of the Emperor and all that.
For me, one of the biggest things that stood out is that I forget what groks are. When they describe groks, I always picture a giant cow.
That's actually, I always thought of like a buffalo type animal,
Right? And so, but then when they were describing them, I was like, oh.
Everything.
I always just forget that because of the way they describe them, right? So I was always like, oh, I always think of them as giant cows. And then when he was describing it, I was like, oh, no. They actually are super dangerous lizards. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The whole like, oh yeah, we have to lobotomize them to farm them or ranch them effectively. Oh, I always did kind of wonder about that.
Like the servitors.
Right. Or like the really big large one when they're like, "Oh, no, 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 no. We do not lobotomize those, otherwise they won't fertilize the eggs." It's like, "Oh man. Life in the 40k universe is hard.
It sucks, man.
It sucks." Um I did really like that one. Mostly because again, it's like the ambles. I always forget what ambles look like too until like somebody's like, "Oh yeah, with its big tusks," and then I'm like, "Oh right, yeah, yeah, those things are bad."
Well, see, just the word amble and the way they're describing them, and they're talking about eating them and with their fur. I was like, okay, it's like a big ox, is kind of what I was
It,
thinking. And then they were talking about the mandibles, and I was like, wait, that's just weird. And I think I ended up looking it up. I was like, it's a giant ant person thing. That's just weird.
Crocs are like giant alligator type things, but like nightmare fuel alligator.
I mean, alligator is delicious.
Alligator is delicious. Which that's what now I'm gonna. Now that we're talking about this, I'm gonna picture that being every time people talk about eating groks, I'm gonna be like, "Oh right, yeah, fried alligator."
That does sound good.
It sounds pretty good,
Even
actually.
though it's late at night, like I could go for some fried alligator.
I wouldn't say no. With
No.
some really nice remoulade with it. Anyways, so there's a lot going on in this book. Let's try to piecemeal it out. You already mentioned Unworthy. What's his role in the narrative? Did you find him compelling? Did you like him?
Well, no, I didn't like him. I don't. I think the sanguinary cult stuff I think is bonkers. I
Fair.
I don't like pain, so I can't imagine like slashing myself for blood. No, just no. And again, that's two veins, gonna leave a scar. Um, but I don't like anybody like him. I mean, he was such the stereotypical cult leader of these, random factions, except that, he actually believes that what he's doing is for the emperor. Like, I think so many of them start that way before they realize, oh, no, we're actually a corn cult in the end. Or Zinch. I always love when I see the leader of a cult for the emperor that's decorated in pink and blue. I was like, yeah, that's Zinchy, y'all. This is not going to be
After
for
the changer of ways.
right. This is not going to be really for the emperor. So no, but I also knew he was like some sort of a red herring. I thought they tried to throw a bunch of red herrings, even though it was in the title. Although it got to the point though that because they kept talking about the simian skull, and when the guy was like, "Don't touch it," I was like, "I wonder if that's the skull that they're talking about." It wasn't until later when it really started. I already pieced together. It was the servo skull. I was like, oh, so it was like that obvious of a skull. It wasn't like something else. But at the same time, it was like, but why the skull was doing it became more interesting to me, and in the end. So that was like, to me, the big whodunit was why the skull was just haphazardly just murdering people. It just goes on a murder spree. But so Unworthy was just one of those red herrings, I think, to it was just another example also, I think, of showing that there's something wrong with the land. Because they even talk about that later, that after they cleared all that out and they sent people out there to refarm and more cults came and it got chaotic again, to the point they finally had to be like, no, this land is just not, no one can be out here.
I So one thing that I really hate, and I don't know if accursed land tropes are as overdone in England as they are here, but like ancient alien burial ground, ancient Native American burial ground, like, ooh, cursed land tropes rub me all kinds of the wrong way. So that could be an explanation for him. The thing that I couldn't wrap my mind around, though, was why they didn't just kill him to begin, like from the get-go. Because, well, on one hand, you're right. Sanguinary cults are a thing, right? And we've seen them before. He's deliberately stopping the production of grain and resources, which is heresy. So, like, the guy is he's not even subtle or coy about being a heretic. I mean, he flat out says, like, he doesn't want our labors, he wants our prayers. Oh, okay. Like, literally anybody else would have shot you because that's heresy.
Mm-hmm.
So the fact that it takes him as long as it does to kill him, I was very relieved. That was
So
again,
the way I saw it was like, first of all, the bookkeeper that was there was a weak bookkeeper.
yes.
Like, he could not, I mean, and he didn't want to ruffle any feathers. And I think that the
No.
laborers there, so like the overseers, they were too worried if they killed him, it would spark a revolt, and they couldn't handle that. So I understood them. It was shocking. And I think that the bookkeeper, like, convinced, what's his name? Tarini, Tarini, you know, to not do anything because he's mostly harmless. It's going to be okay. And it wasn't until, like, things just got pushed when the near riot happened that finally Tarini was like, that's it. Like, we're done with you. But it wasn't even Tarini. It was
How.
It was Hal, because Tarini was already dead, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
At that point, Hal's just had enough of it.
Yeah, it's like, I'm done with everything that's going on here. Basically, anyone who's crossed me, who's not doing this, you're all going to get killed. Yeah, so to me, the reason why this cursed land thing, like, didn't bother me, because at least it wasn't like an Indian burial ground. It wasn't like, oh, this is an ancient land. Like, we have no idea. They don't even know why this land is like this. It just is. So
I hated that trope was in play, but actually the one thing I did like is, so I've always said this about Stephen King. One of my favorite Stephen King books is Pet Sematary. And one of the reasons I like it is that, if you recall, when they ask, well, why does the cemetery bring things back to life? Just does. Like, not everything needs an explanation. And especially in the Warhammer 40k universe, right? Not everything needs an explanation. And most normal people will go their entire lives without getting an explanation, right? So, like, I think we had talked about that with Steel Tread. In Steel Tread, they go that entire book. They never even confront the big bad. They never talk to him. They never hear his big overarching plan, because they're just grunts.
mm-hmm.
Theirs is not to reason why, right?
Right.
I kind of liked, like, as much as I didn't like that the trope was in play, I did like that they weren't like, and this is what it is. Look at this. Here's a big exposition. I did like that, because I'm like, I don't really need to know why. Like, there's obviously something very wrong about it when they're talking about the name, which I'm going to assume was the original Xenos name for it. And when they talk about saying the word, how they're like, that's not a good word. Right? So, like, okay.
I don't know if it was
stuff going on here.
Xenos or just, I don't know, some crazed heretic. You know, because they talk about how some of those words, like the unwords and stuff, like, when you hear it, it's just like, you feel wrong. Like, they even talked about that, I think it was in the Ravener series, where when the Administratum is basically tricking all these people into going through all these words, and when a word comes up that makes them go like, oh God, and they start getting nauseous, well, then they figure out that's one of the unwords, and by the way, you're going to be killed now. But, you know, they talk about how those words will have power, and with those different cults and everything, how it just feels wrong.
Yeah. And I liked that. I liked that concept. That I thought was interesting. And it also really didn't need that much of an explanation, other than to just be like, yeah, this land is cursed. Now, having said that, it did still feel like just a little... This book reminded me a lot of Spider-Man 3. There were just a few too many elements at play for me. But that one, I did like that they didn't go into an explanation, because I was kind of waiting for that in the ether. I was like, okay, here we're going to find out what happened. Point. I did like that. So, let's talk about one of the other super creepy figures. Gamble.
Okay, because
what was up with Gamble?
Just when I thought that Warhammer 40k couldn't make the idea of servitors creepier, they introduce a child's toy that used to be a human. That's so messed up. Like I didn't need to, like, think clowns are creepy enough as it is. Like, it didn't scar all of us, when we were younger, even though that was a terrible movie, but still, it still scarred us. Uh, yeah, no, I did not need this in my head.
No. Um, I didn't. Oh God, I had a love-hate relationship with this because on one hand, I didn't like it because I was like, oh, that's low-hanging fruit, clowns. But on the other, Guy Haley, I think, was the first to. It was in the Guy Haley book, wasn't it? Yeah, I think it was in the Guy Haley crime book. Was the first book where I remember them really talking about servitors and how there's maybe a little more sentience needed to make them function.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a terrifying idea. And I feel like people are really running with that idea, right? To really pepper in that there's something not quite right with some of the servitors. So that was kind of what I got with Gamble, was that, yes, he's a servitor, but like when he talked about his violent fits and his rages that he would go into, I was like, oh, that was probably not a well done servitor. They left just a smidge too much sentience in that one.
No, and it was just interesting. Like, it just kind of shows in a lot of Warhammer 40k that the wealthy, the world is just their playthings. Oh, this criminal who's going to be lobotomized and turned into a servitor, let's make him a child's toy because that's not creepy. Did anyone see Chucky? No? I mean, come on.
And I think it also shows how clueless or maybe just blasé they are, because
the world is their playthings.
But not only that, he talks about having to hide under his bed because Gamble was in another one of his fits. Like, who leaves that with their child?
People who can't be bothered to raise their kids?
Like, I guess they're just like, well, he hasn't killed him yet, so it seems fine. Or are they just so disconnected that message never gets to them? Like, oh, well, my house servants would tell me if the toy was dangerous, wouldn't they? Like,
it's also, a perspective from a child's mind at the same time, where things can seem much scarier than they actually are. But his mother did seem like very hands-off.
Very, very, very. Did Gamble add to the overall story for you?
No.
Other than his, and this was, I think, the part that really I didn't like, was the very heavy-handed, the dream sequence with Gamble when he's like, they forced them to repent. I was like, well, yeah, obviously. Like, I think we got that. I found that to be a little like, that didn't serve anything really, other than to remind you that the world of Warhammer 40k is somewhat dark, and as you said, there are pretty callous people if you're on the upper echelons. Like, more callous even than some of our elites.
Well, it also just might have been a slight nod to the servo skull, like maybe.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they were forced to, especially hearing like we were forced to repent. Okay, let's see how much this guy really repented and apparently didn't let go, or how much sentience does the skull still have. Like, that's just fucking creepy. But there's a reason why I've never liked the servo skulls, because I'm not a skull person, so that's a big part of it. But I'd have to say the cherubs are definitely the worst. I hate those.
I can't handle the cherubs. The cherub
creeps me out. I can't do it. And I think it has a lot to do with, it might have a lot to do with being a mom. And honestly, like, after having 2 miscarriages, when I see stuff like that, it really bothers me. It just grossly bothers me. So, it's just repugnant on a totally different level for me. And then the servo skulls are like right underneath that. And then servitors right underneath that.
The cherubim creep me out a lot. I was actually kind of half expecting one to show up in this book because they were just kind of throwing all of the creepy things in. The cherubim bother me. Like, I don't even have that emotional connection that you have, and I find them very repugnant. Now, having said that, I know that we've had a couple of our listeners who have said that they actually find them kind of funny. Like, because one of the explanations, and I think it was Panny Mauser who gave this to me, I will shout out to her on this one. The explanation was that because it's like, it takes the 40K universe to an extreme, right? Like, look at this. Like, they're using babies as servitors because that's where we're at in life. Like, that's how over the top it is. That then it kind of goes around the horn for her.
Mm-hmm.
Totally makes sense. Disagree, but understand it makes sense.
Right. Well,
The servo skulls haven't really bothered me. The only one that did bother me was also in Guy Haley, the Frater Matthews servo skull.
well, just because
it was his favorite.
you find out what it's from, yes, that's like,
Yeah.
no.
It's one thing to just be like, here's a servo skull, and you're like, awesome, thanks. It's another thing to be like, this was John. John and I were really good friends, and now he's my servo skull. Isn't that nice?
That was like as creepy as. Do you remember in the Telltale game, Did you ever play The Walking Dead, the Telltale game? Okay. So when that guy who ends up taking Clementine, and he's just like, I can't wait for you to meet my wife, and opens up the bag, and it's her skull that's in there because she's still zombied and she's still talking. I'm like, no. No. And that's very similar.
Very similar. There's something a little like, they generally don't bother me unless you ascribe like a personality to them or a person to them. Like, oh yeah, this was John.
Be like Hamlet
Yeah.
going, this is York.
York serves me.
Right.
It's weird. Like, that part gets weird as long as it's like,
Random skull.
yeah, I don't know what that says about me personally, that I'm like, no, it needs to be anonymous.
You know what that says about you? It says that you don't care where your chicken comes from as long as it wasn't your pet and you had to watch it get killed.
Okay, that's true, and I have always said that if we actually had to hunt for our own meat or like acquire our own meat, I would be a vegetarian. That's all there is to it. Maybe, well, no, I was gonna say maybe a pescatarian, but whenever we used to go fishing with my in-laws, I cried every time they killed the fish. That's me. So, too much of a city kid, having grown up in the country. Yeah, it's exactly what that is. I can't have knowledge of where this thing came from. But I don't know. I think, yes, Gamble's whole purpose was there to tell us a couple of things that we already kind of had figured out, which made it a little hard for me. Did you like the main protagonist, though? Not Rutger Howard. Rutger Howe. Did you like him?
Yeah, I did.
Did you?
Yeah, a kid trying to prove himself, the youngest of three, trying to, fight for that inheritance, and he's really trying to prove himself on his first assignment, and he's just coming thrown in like really way over his head, but he ended up commanding it pretty well in the end.
Agree with that. I would absolutely agree that he does take charge. You kind of expect him to turn into that callow child, and instead he's like, all right, I'm in charge here. He's better equipped than I think he thought he was.
Right. Well, I think it was, Tarini's death. It was just like, all right, you know what? I'm done playing around here. We tried to do this the nice way. And now you guys have gone too far.
I would agree with that. Mm-hmm. Were you invested in it, like that whole story about like his brothers and his father and his rise to becoming chief enforcer?
No, because that to me seemed like it would be something down the line, like maybe that was going to come in like later books or something like that. But it didn't seem like too crucial like for the story. The only reason why I appreciated him saying what happened with his brothers is because when he said, and my mom died a month later, I'm like, can we like get some info on that? So it was a way to wrap that loose end up. And so that I appreciated.
Right. I think I wasn't that invested in it because it was more of like, I don't even know that we really got to see him as a character up until that end, right? He's just kind of there and kind of reacting to stuff until the end when he starts to take charge. And I really think you're right. I think part of it was the death of that guy, but I also think it was part of when all of the people leave. When he's like, no, 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 you need to stop, you need to stop. And there's something that just kind of clicks in him, right? And all right, by God, I am going to, like, I will assert whatever authority I have here. I'm going to let everybody know that these people have left and abandoned their posts. And we will establish some order here. Like, he didn't panic, he didn't freak out. That was when I felt like we really got to know him as a character and actually get to see him. But we, similar to what you just said, like, I don't know that we necessarily had enough information. Like, he told us, yeah, you know, my dad liked a lot of different women. He got sons from different types of women. This is where I'm at in life. Oh, okay, I guess. So in the end, when he's like, oh, I killed both my brothers, by the way. Okay. I kind of assumed you were going to, but okay.
Right. I mean, it was kind of leading up, or at least not kill them, but, you know, ruin the reputation or
right
something.
Exit them stage right.
Right. Which he did anyway, but they killed his mom, which is like, why did you do that? I mean, wouldn't you rather have killed him? That doesn't make any sense, but, you know, who knows?
I wasn't sure if it was because, like, they thought he was going to be home and they got her, or if it was because they thought that it would lure him out, or if it was just to send a message to be like, back off now, we already killed your mom.
Right, could be.
Right? Or to provoke him, kind of like in The Godfather when they kill Sonny, to provoke, right? This, or rather when they have what's-his-face beat up his sister so that they will then provoke that reaction to then kill Sonny. Like, I don't know if that's what they were going for. If so, how did that work out for you?
What I thought was very comical about that in the end was when he met with his dad, and his dad was like, so they're dead? Yep. All right.
Pretty much like, okay.
I knew it was going to be down to one of you, so okay.
Right. It was like, not the book, but the movie version of Stardust. When Peter O'Toole is like, because he has all those sons, right? And he's like, what did happen to the two dead ones? And everyone's like, wasn't me. And he's like, whatever. Like, one of you gotta, like, one of you has to be remaining. You all have to kill each other until one's left, right? I don't know why, but as much as we bitch about bored rich people stories and how much we don't like bored rich people stories, there's something undeniably fun about that level of the callousness. Like, oh, so both your brothers are dead? Yep. Okay. I knew one of you had to survive.
I guess you're chief enforcer then.
Right? Like, I don't know why I love that trope. Despite not liking bored rich people stories, I really do like that concept. And when it shows up, I'm always like, ooh. And I think because of my affinity for Stardust, it kind of made me then suddenly picture Peter O'Toole as his dad. Which, you know, Peter O'Toole probably will be alive in Warhammer 40k. He's preserved well enough.
Well, until that one rejuvenate surgery goes wrong.
Oh my God. That's kind of terrible. Did you like the narrative structure? Because it's told as a memoir, right? It's clearly he's telling us this years after it's occurred. Did you like that?
Because he talks about, you know, how he's like, he's already chief enforcer, and he's like, and I've outlawed sanguinary cults and blah, blah, blah. I was like, I don't know why they weren't outlawed to begin with, but that's cool.
Seriously.
Like, what is wrong with you guys?
So many things.
Right. I mean,
that's the answer to that question.
I mean, these agro worlds out in the fringes, you know, who the only thing they do is supply food to put on the ships to go away.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, like, you know, just don't disturb the peace too much and, like, cause a ruckus and interfere with the ties, and we'll just kind of let you do things unless it's really overtly heresy, then we'll get into it. But, you know, we have these other murders to get into before we deal with, like, people just cutting themselves because they're emo or whatever. Right.
Pretty much. Not to put too fine a point on it.
I forgot the question.
Did you like the narrative structures? So,
Oh, okay. So memoir, right? It was okay. I mean,
I think if I had to point to my biggest problem with the book, that was probably it. Because for two reasons. One, it removed all sense of danger. We know he survives, we know he gets out of this.
mm-hmm.
So, like, there were
I
a
could see
couple
that.
times. There were a couple times where he's like, it's late at night and there's that wild grox that's out on the loose and it's pitch black dark. I gotta run out there. I'm like, yeah, but we know you're gonna be fine.
See,
And
I was
then,
never worried for him. It was when anybody
right.
else went outside, I was like, oh dear Lord.
Don't go out there. But that kind of like I like the stories where you don't know if the protagonist is going to live or not. And
Yeah, but it was all told
so
from
that
his
kind of took
point
it
of view as well. So, I mean, it's the same thing with Eisenhorn, right? When it's told from a first-person point of view,
very much so.
nothing's gonna bad's gonna happen to them. I guess not necessarily because
Not
I
necessarily.
have read books where they did die at the end, but but then again, like you said, that's not going to happen because he talks about being chief enforcer and blah blah blah.
Right. And I think the other thing that I kind of struggled with was that every now and then he would be like, I did this, but I don't make that mistake anymore, and I've learned a lot. And I'm like, okay, cool. Like there were a couple things where he was like, oh, like I learned this along the way, and I'm like, weird flex, but okay. Like it just didn't fit with what he was talking about. Like there were a few things,
Maybe,
like the one where he was like, like, oh, my mother, I would never see my mother alive again. Like, oh, that's sad. But then there were
you
a few
know,
other times where I was just like,
but to me, this
okay.
really came across as like an amateurly written memoir, which I totally imagine that's how somebody
Fair.
would write it. I mean, although I did read sometimes like Dan Brown wrote it. Um, and I'm not saying Justin Hill is Dan Brown. Like I've read Justin Hill's books. He writes well. I just saying like this came across that it was written by like a guy who doesn't write well, and it's his memoirs, and that's exactly how he would write. And to be honest, if that's what he was going for, doing that kind of thing is kind of hard. It's really hard to write in a style and voice that's not your own to begin
It's
with.
not yours.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I will give you that. I don't know. For some reason, and I think yeah, that style in general, I'm not a big fan of. And I'm a big fan of Justin Hill too. I should probably state that as well. I liked his Cadia Stands books. I'm actually looking over the top of my screen right now. He wrote a Necromunda book called Terminal Overkill.
Oh yeah, you
Loved
praised
it.
that one. Yeah.
Loved that book. So it's not that I'm not a Justin Hill fan. I just feel like, and I know I've said this before, horror's hard. Like horror writing in general is very hard. And not everybody can do it.
Really, I took this more as a Warhammer Crime than a Warhammer Horror. Because it
really kind of wasn't it?
I mean, the only thing is that the murderer, is a horror-esque murderer.
I mean, when you say it like that, I almost wonder if he wrote this as a crime novel and they were like, this is a horror novel. And he was like, oh, put a clown in there. And then it was a horror novel. And that's not quite the way it worked. Anyways, let's talk about the other major horror element of this book, which is the Grox. Were the Grox red herrings? Was it too much? Like, did you care about the Grox? Because we had escaped Grox. We had sentient Grox. We had Grox.
Well, the Grox I felt were more like, an after effect, because that woman was murdered, right. And they let the Grox out. It was just like an extra thing that's out there. Like, I will like point to Jurassic Park Lost World, and that the fact that all the dinosaurs are out loose just is another thing that they're dealing with, even though their main goal is this other thing. So when I say that, I'm talking specifically with probably my favorite scene in the whole movie, and that's the raptors in the grass, because if that wasn't an homage to Jaws, I don't know what is. But it was just another thing that everyone is having to deal with. Like, we already got these other problems. Now we got these, wild lizards out here who can come and eat us at any moment.
Right.
Tensions are already high. Now we got angry lizards.
Okay, I guess that is a good point.
Man, I'm just full of good points for you today.
Well, you are. Well, it's... So, again, because I really did... Like, I will say that, like, this afternoon I was thinking about this, and I was like, I think I hated this book. Like, that's where I was at. And I was prepared to be way harsher, but then I was like, we don't typically do that. But also, like, okay.
This isn't a Peter Fetnavari book, okay?
Nothing is. Well, okay. So that was like, so I was telling my husband, I was like, I hated this book. And he was like, on a scale of 1 to that Requiem book. Okay, well, like, if that's my scale, this is like hitting it like a 6 or a 7. Like, it's not even like, well, it's like a 9. No. I think the Groks, to me, like, so for me, I like a good monster movie, right? I love good monster stories. They're fun, really, arguably. Well, Cujo's not, but really,
no, not.
I hate Cujo. But Pet Sematary is actually, arguably a monster movie.
You know what? That's probably why I like Steel Tread the most. That was like a giant monster.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Exactly like that. A good monster story is fun, and it's hard to beat. So, like, with this book, I feel like as though had he focused in on one of these elements, I probably would have loved it. The Groks are a good example along the lines of Jurassic World. Like, he could have had other stuff going on, and then at some point he could have jumped on a motorcycle and ridden through the grass with the Groks following alongside him, and then it would have been the book of the year. I hated Jurassic World up until that scene.
Wait,
when they're going through
Jurassic
the forest.
World or Lost World? 2 different things.
Yeah, Jurassic... Wait.
I was talking about Lost World.
Oh! No, I didn't... God, I haven't seen Lost World in forever. Sorry.
Honestly, that's the only good part, is the raptors in the grass. Because unfortunately, immediately afterwards is the scene where Jeff Goldblum's daughter does the high bar
flip over
high
the
bar
thing.
act, yes, to kick the raptor. So, and then it was like, and down goes the movie.
Felt that way about Jurassic World, though. Like, the whole movie kind of sucked up until that scene when they're on the motorcycle and they're going through, and I was just like, this is the greatest movie I've ever seen. Like, that's all it takes for me. We just needed to have a dude on a motorcycle with Groks. But had he focused on any one of the elements, because the whole thing with the Groks, I was just kind of like, okay, like, there's a big Groks in a pen, and then it ate the zealot guy. Okay.
Well, I mean, that's just how they chose to kill him. Which actually was like such a... I was imagining We Are Sparta as he kicked him down into the pit.
What is that, 300?
Yeah.
This is... Exactly. Just thunk. This is Grok's pit. It just dawned on me, we haven't even talked about the weird psyker girl, because I can't even go into that right now. What did you make of the titular skull?
I thought that was fascinating. Because it was, some random story Tarini was telling ends up coming back in full circle. In the end, they're like, oh, the guy who said he's going to come back for you? Well done. Well done. I always appreciate that because the story fit at the time. And it seemed like such a throwaway thing. So I really like that when they bring that in.
Right.
So that to me was like, okay, that's when I was like, this is a really good whodunit. Because I knew it was the skull. They've been talking about the servo skull was acting weird and kept getting in their faces and like flicking the drill at them and stuff. It's just like, why do you have a servo skull with a drill and a saw? Like, what is wrong with everybody here?
That was my problem with it, is that I don't mind if you're going to telegraph a villain, that's fine. But I don't like when then the narrative is like, but what's going on here? Who could it be? I mean, that thing's like super creepy and it has all the instruments that match this and it's just floating off at night for some reason. That's kind of weird. But what's going on here? Like I felt like the Red Letter Media, I know I referenced the Red Letter Media reviews a lot, but the one especially for the second prequel movie where he's sitting there screaming, Palpatine's behind it. Like, don't act like it's a mystery when you've painted a picture that's clear as day. The second they introduced the servo skull, I was like, oh, that's it, isn't it? And
well,
then,
yeah, I mean, it's right there in the title, right? I mean,
it's right there in the title.
The Bookkeeper
right?
skull.
Like, he was trying to steer you towards that simian skull, but I was like, no. Just, no, stop. Just stop with this. I think I would have liked it a little bit better had he kept it, like, had he not been like, oh, but what could this be? Like, stop throwing red herrings. We've figured it out. Now, as you said, unpack who, what, when, where, why, and how a servo skull is killing people.
Well, not only that, but there's all these weird
And
things
then making
going on.
those, yeah,
I mean,
the straw men.
I mean, yes, the servo skull is weird, but okay, whatever. Servo skulls are weird. We have the sanguinary cult. We have Grox on the loose, and we have this weird little witch girl. We have people showing up dead. And a straw man always appears by that. So, like,
why?
I don't know. Why not?
Because it's creepy.
Right. It's like, a little voodoo doll, right? It's pretty much kind of what it is. And so I could see where they'd be like, where we know. The thing is, I think that we know it's the skull because the title of the book, honestly.
Well, and because he pretty much just like every time that skull comes into the screen, he throws a giant spotlight on it and then takes it away. But it's like, we saw that. I think that was my big problem too. Had he toned back or dialed back some of the stuff with the servo skull?
It didn't appear that way to me.
Fair enough. So like you don't like things that you've seen before. I don't like things like if I can suss out the killer as soon as the killer is introduced, that to me is, I'm like, nah, I'm done with this. So I think I would have liked it had there been less of a spotlight on the skull. Or had they focused on the unraveling of it.
But you see, it's not though, because yes, it's obviously the skull, but the big killer is why the skull is doing it. So that's why it won over for me. I usually don't like it either when you can like identify the, who's done it, or you can figure out the end like way before. But the fact that it was okay, yes, the skull, but why is the skull doing this? And when you suss out why, what exactly is the skull, that's what sealed it for me right there. That's like, okay, that's the whodunit.
Right. And I could see that. I needed more focus on that. Like I would have liked it a lot more had he been like, oh my God, I think it's the servo skull. And then he's trying to figure out why. Because it would have been kind of interesting if you had a guy who was like, I think the servo skull's killing people. Because if you said that, I think every other person in that room would have been like, are you high? Right? Because the natural assumption, like we saw that in that Guy Haley book, back over my shoulder. We saw that in that Guy Haley book when they're like, I think maybe a servitor killed a person. And everyone's like, no, impossible. Who would ever heard of something so stupid? Right? That I think I would have enjoyed more. But the servo skull in general, I will say that I didn't like the execution, but the concept, I'm kind of here for a Murdo servo skull.
I mean,
Murdo skull?
I didn't think anything of him not immediately coming to the conclusion of the servo skull, because he thought when he killed Unworthy, that was going to be it. But when they kept on happening, he's now just like, okay, now I'm confused. Now I don't know what's going on. And a revolt was happening. So
right. And I've got the little girl from the ring who is corporeal but isn't corporeal. I don't know.
That was, I mean, that like her mom is now dead and she's
a drug addict.
She wasn't, and okay, so I have no idea what's been happening here. Everyone's leaving. the harvest is not going to happen. Like, this is so bad. So I didn't think anything of it when he didn't immediately come to the conclusion, wait, what if it's the servo skull? Because he had so many other things going on.
For sure. What did you think of creepy little ring girl and her mom and the whole Obscura subplot?
That Obscura subplot was fascinating, to be honest. And just in that, it just was like another layer of the onion to show what was wrong with this place. So many things were wrong. And I really liked Tarini sussing out that mystery with that whole thing. The little girl, it's not the first time we've seen something like this. My big frustration with her was that she knew what was going on. She knew it wasn't a he. She kept saying an it, but then she wouldn't tell anybody what it was. Like, honey, if you know what it is, why aren't you saying something? Maybe no one will believe you. That's possible. But now there's this enforcer here who's talking to you. He probably would believe you. Well, or at least look into it.
She's calling him the straw man, and straw men appear at victims around victims. The straw men appear after, like the little effigies appear, and then the actual straw men appear. So it's like even she knows what's going on, but she doesn't know what's going on because she keeps calling it the straw man. Well, in the end, those basically had nothing to do with the servo skull.
Mm-hmm. Maybe.
I got strong feelings on all of that, but I don't even know how to process right now. But, like, you're right. Like, you have a little bit more information, Pumpkin, and you can clearly communicate. Like, she wasn't, like, speaking in riddles or anything like that. Everything was crystal clear except for that, where she'd be like, oh, the straw man's doing this. Oh, okay. Like, but everything else that you're saying is totally coherent.
Right.
And the thing with the Obscura, that was one that I struggled with that because when it happened, I was kind of like, why do I care about this? He's a drug dealer.
Well, he's a drug addict. She's a drug
He's
dealer.
a drug addict. She's the dealer. Okay.
But I think that was just part of Tarini because he was so confused about why this guy suddenly dropped dead. So he's also trying to suss out, because they were friends. So he's trying to suss out what happened there, along with what in the world is going on with everything else. So it was just a whirlwind of stuff trying to figure out that was like too much for two enforcers to handle on their own.
For sure. And I will say, the only thing that I liked partially about that is that I have always hated the CSI shows because they come to the murder victim's house and there's blood on the floor, or there's old traces of blood, right, on the floor, and clearly that had to do with the murder. Did these people never cut themselves shaving? Did their kid never leave something on the floor and they stepped on it and they cut their foot open? Like, I always have a problem with that because every clue that people find it relates entirely to the murder. This I thought was really interesting because you're right. There were like things where they're like, now all of a sudden there's Obscura addicts and there's a cult over here and there's Groks, and none of this has anything to do with what's going on. So as a reader, I kind of found it frustrating. But then on the other hand, I was like, I am glad that not everything revolved around this one central point.
Right.
That these guys are trying to figure out what's going on here. And some stuff is just bonkers because it's the Warhammer 40k universe. It is all bonkers. And none of it's clean cut. I will give it that. That was, yeah.
You saying that's made me think of Hawkeye's speech to Scarlet Witch and Age of Ultron.
None of this makes sense.
The city is flying, and we're fighting an army of robots, and I got a bow and arrow. None of this makes sense.
I loved that. That is easily one of my top 10, maybe even top 5 favorite Marvel moments. Yeah. Because that's his speech. And he's just like, if you need to sit in here, that's fine. I can't babysit you, though. So just chill and I'll be back. But I love that when he's like, we're fighting robots. I got a bow and arrow. None of it makes sense. That is very much, that does fit with that very well. I
can say that about a lot of Warhammer 40k. The city is flying.
To be fair. Right.
There's giant robots.
Exactly.
Somebody could have a bow and arrow. It doesn't make any sense. But this is where we are. Welcome to Warhammer 40k.
Pretty much. It's bonkers. And it's funny because as much as I like some of the books that are bonkers, this one just didn't click with me. And I like the Warhammer line. The horror line. I do like the horror line. There's been a couple misses for me lately. Get David Annandale back in here, or Josh. Oh, never mind. Too soon.
Always too soon.
Or Phil Kelly. Phil Kelly wrote that great ghost story. Like, I would more of that, please. I don't know. And by the way, just write more Necromunda, dude. Give me a sequel to Terminal Overkill. Need that in my life. I am glad that we did a horror novel to take a break from our regular scheduled program so that we can get back into our regularly scheduled program of, well, this one's probably going to be a little crazy too because it's Astra Militarum. And it is.
Talking about the Krieg.
I'm talking about the Krieg. Happy shovel noises. I'm really excited for this book. The Krieg are such a fan favorite with memes. And I think a lot of times they do kind of just get boiled down into crazy cloned gas mask people.
I don't know anything about them. My first time ever seeing the Krieg was when I first started getting into a little bit of Warhammer, and it was when Chernobyl came out, and there was this great meme that I have, and it showed it was the actual I guess cover art of the show Chernobyl, and it said Chernobyl, or as the Krieg call it, Tuesday.
Exactly. I'm really excited, and I hope he can flesh them out a little bit more and give them more personality and stuff. I like this idea. We just read the one about Steel Tread, which was with the heavy armor guys, right? Which I feel like they don't ever get enough love. We've got the Krieg one. There's a Catachan book coming out soon. Obviously, we've seen the Cadian books, right? And Steel Tread was arguably about the Cadian regiments too.
Right.
I'm kind of excited for this. I'm here for fleshing out the infamous Militarum regiments more. I am here for that.
My aunt, we just read, Volpone Glory, so we got to see another side of the Volpone.
Yes, which was also very interesting.
I liked that one.
I did like that one. My expectations were thoroughly subverted in that one. So I'm excited for Krieg. That should be a good one, and it is available for our fans who listen to audio only. It is available in audio only.
Oh, for some reason I thought you picked it up. I was like, it didn't have green pages, but no.
It did not have green pages.
Although I think it would be more brown pages if it was going to be anything.
Brown, rubberized, gas masks. No, thank you.
Do they have faces under there, or is it just a gas mask? Are they just born with the gas masks now?
That would actually kind of be hilarious.
That would be kind of funny.
If they're like, oh, this doesn't come off. This is my face.
Kind of like, the Chaos Marines, how the helmets just kind of meld to their faces.
Ew. I don't mind telling everybody that is one of the details that bothers me the most. And Lords of Silence, when what's-his-face was like, I can still take my helmet off if I want. I was like, again, weird flex. So, I'm not too corrupt yet.
I think it's I think it's more the Zinch ones that have the trouble with the helmets coming off, because the way that they change, the horns kind of grow out. Not that helmet's not coming off anymore.
There is that. But, if you ever seen some of the Death Guard figures, they have, maws that are clearly, through the helmet. They're... I know that this goes without saying because it's Nurgle, but you're never getting that clean.
But do they want to, though?
Did I mention I'm too way too vain to join Nurgle's army.
See, I think the thing for me was not I can still take my helmet off, but it was when they were walking around, they talked about the sloshing in the boots. I was like, you know what? Okay, I can't.
I can't. I literally can't even. No. Thank you. Do you want to take us out, Carrie?
Yeah, with, that cheery note about...
With that cheery note of sloshing.
Sloshing, right. You've listened to the Warhammer 40k Book Club episode regarding The Bookkeeper's Skull by Justin D. Hill. Be sure to join us next time for Krieg by Steve Lyons. We are an unofficial book club and not affiliated with the Black Library or any of its affiliates. You can find both the vidcast and podcast on our website, WH40kbookclub.com. If you like this episode, please like, subscribe, give a review, and all those things to the vidcast on YouTube or the podcast anywhere you get podcasts. Our site also has articles about our adventures and reading other Warhammer 40k books and short stories outside of the book club books, so please stay a while and read from our crag. I'm still Alfarius.
Don't get you this chartreuse.
No, get it. It's fun. It's a fun little whodunit. I would not lead you astray. She secretly paints Death Guard, so she totally would.
She just claimed she's Alfarius, and then she's like, I wouldn't lead you astray?
Yeah, totally.
But your whole ethos is astray.
I don't secretly paint Death Guard either.
Harsh. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everybody.